Today, we've actually got Jack Drury from Shure, who's going to answer your questions about audio, specifically leaning into, I think, podcast questions.
Yeah, but sounds good.
I think you've also got a background in more than podcasts, right?
Yeah, so I started out as a live engineer, really, and got really into RF, radio microphones, things like that, big shows, big festivals. So that was where I cut my teeth and was working for about 10 years. And then obviously the pandemic hits, not so many live music events anymore. But Shure, the company that I work for, we have a number of excellent microphones, and one of them, the one we're using, the SM7B, became very popular for podcasting. So I found my skill set pivoting, and I started working on a lot of podcast-related tech support questions for customers that were just getting into it, what they needed to know. A lot of artists actually that we were working with started doing podcasts, and we were able to give that kind of support. So I'm able to have a foot in both camps now, in both areas.
Yeah, I mean, here's a plug. I use an SM7B. I was actually just using one in my hotel room for recording. So those are great mics. But like you said, a lot of folks are coming into recording now in different ways because of podcasting specifically. There's more people buying microphones. And so we've got a couple of popular questions, but one of which I want to start off with is about possibly getting a new mic.
Okay.
So let's start with this one. The question is, when should I get a new mic, and when should I instead just change my environment when podcasting?
Such a good question. I think that depends on what problem you're having. Right? So, I mean, this is a good example. We're in ISE Hall 8 right now. There's a load of audio stuff going on. And we're using SM7Bs, so it's going to be very, very focused on us talking. I imagine there's still a little bit of bleed that's going to get into this system. Our audio engineer is doing a fantastic job.
Sure, yeah.
But ideally, if we were going to do this, we might not do it in ISE. Maybe we change our environment to go somewhere quieter if we were going to turn this into a big, long series, right? Depending on what problem you're having, if you're recording in your kitchen and you've got a big, large diaphragm condenser microphone and it's picking up the sound of the taps, the microwaves, the cats, then opting for a new microphone in that situation would assist, but maybe not completely solve the problem.
Yeah.
So you might want to be doing both things. What's cool about this is getting a new microphone is relatively cheap. If you've got the big, large diaphragm condenser, you get an SM58 for $100. It's going to do a really good job for you. And you can probably still keep podcasting in your kitchen. Remodeling your kitchen into a podcast studio might not be the most cost-effective way to solve that problem. So I do think it depends on what problem you're having. What do you think? How do you tend to run this stuff?
Honestly, I would break it down to thinking about control.
Yeah.
Not that we have to be control freaks, but we are going to be a little bit of a control freak if we're responsible for audio. So for me, I think it's about what can you control in this scenario. If I can control my environment, then I should try that.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I've already picked my equipment for a reason.
So true.
But if I cannot, then I would lean on the equipment side because, like you said, the cost of doing so is generally speaking pretty small. And by changing the equipment, you're giving yourself more things for more environments potentially because you've kind of got more tools on the tool belt. But you mentioned that, yes, we are using some of these Shure mics now. So definitely want to thank Shure for partnering with the AVIXA TV studio over here at ISE. Want to move on to another microphone question kind of related to the idea of some of those mics we just mentioned, USB mics.
Yep.
Those are so popular to use right now and have been for a while. So here's the question. If I'm using a USB mixer now, could I just simplify with a USB mic instead?
It's a good question. If you've just got one mic, then yes, you could get a USB microphone. The big advantage with that is it just streamlines the whole setup, right? You plug it in, as long as your DAW sees it, you're ready to go.
Yeah.
I think if you're ever going to be recording with multiple people in a space, there is still a place for the podcast mixer, especially as they can print a mix there and then, right? So you can do a podcast into a podcast mixer, it prints out a multi-wav, you can then just get your daughter see that as well and get that straight in. So I think, again, it really depends on your situation, but if it's just one microphone, I mean, I do both. If I'm recording podcasts with multiple people, I have a mixer.
Yeah.
If I'm just going to go and do some solo content or interview somebody remotely, I've got a USB microphone.
Yeah. I actually use the ones where they do both, where it's got a USB and then I can also go XLR. So one thing in my bag, that'll definitely speed things up for me and make me able to have more utility.
Yeah, MV7 Plus does USB and XLR connectivity.
Yes.
And that's the way to go. Absolutely.
So what if another popular question about more than one USB mic, So what if I only have one computer, but I have multiple USB mics? What do I do then?
So this is a tricky one. The problem is when you plug in a USB device into a computer, it doesn't treat a USB device in the same way that it treat like a network device. So it's not giving it an IP address or anything like that. Most USB devices just kind of exist within the computer, and how it manages them can move around inside. So what that means is you plug a USB mic in, the computer goes, cool, I know what you are, you've got one input, you've maybe got one output, I know how to deal with that. Second USB mic arrives, the computer is then going to be a bit confused. Okay, it's going to say, okay, maybe I'm going to mix my inputs between these two things up. So it works. A lot of the questions that we get when users start doing this is like, why does channel 1 move around in my DAW, right? Why does one mic suddenly just lose itself? To help counteract that problem, we developed a piece of software called Motif Mix. So Motif is kind of our catch-all for content creation. If you're looking in the Motif portfolio at Shure, you're in MV7s, you're in MoveMic, you're in Motif Mix. And Motif Mix, when you plug the USB in, the software gives the USB mic an identity as far as the software is concerned.
Awesome.
So then you can plug multiple USB mics in and treat it like a little mixer. It all appears in the hub. You select what you want to do, how you want to record it, and all that audio is then consistent. Everything comes in and goes out how you want it to work. So that's how I would recommend working with it. That's not just for Shure devices either. Any USB device can be mounted and worked with in Motif Mix. The only other way to do it is to build an aggregate device in a Mac, and that's complicated and it's a pain, and I wouldn't want to do it. So
Sure. Work smarter, not harder is the adage.
Work smarter, not harder, precisely.
And translation to everything you just said, for those listening, was we are living in the future now. This was not a thing years ago, so it's really great to hear that we have solutions for this. Let's have another question, still about microphones.
Yep.
Actually, honestly, I think all of our questions are probably going to be about microphones here. This is related to certain models that people see.
Okay.
So the question is, why does it look like all podcasters are using the same 2 or 3 models of mic? Are they really all the same?
This is a really funny story. SM7B we're using now came to market in 1973.
Oh, wow.
Right? There is no podcasting in 1973. The original goal for this product was to get rid of large diaphragm condenser microphones in broadcast studios in America. We wanted to have a dynamic microphone in there. We felt that the dynamic microphone that we could develop would give a lot of advantages to that kind of situation, but it largely failed. The SM5, the SM7, and the SM7B, they weren't really taken up in those spaces. The spaces were treated anyway. They liked their large diaphragm condensers. Why would we use something like this? And the product kind of stayed in the portfolio for a while. It got used on a couple of like Michael Jackson albums, Stevie Wonder albums. It was a bit of a secret tool, right, for lots of recording engineers who wanted to be able to get condenser mic performance without picking up the sound of the room. But it didn't sell loads. And then this podcasting thing kind of starts to happen around 2010, and we start to see the sales increase. And I think by the time the pandemic hits and podcasting becomes really popular, it's now like one of our top selling products in the whole company. So it's an accidental success. We didn't design it to be used for this because the market didn't exist, but the market decided, no. This design, dynamic microphone, humbucking voice coil, the acoustic principle of the device, right? The fact that the kind of diaphragm lives halfway down the microphone and it's equal distance to the front to the back. All this stuff turns out to be really, really good for this podcasting thing. So that's why a lot of people are using it. Are they all the same microphone? An interesting thing, the SM58, the SM57, the SM7B, they all use the same transducer. They are all using the Unidyne 3 transducer that we developed in 1963.
Yeah, I actually have an old Shure microphone. It's silver. It does not work anymore, but it looks super classy.
Yeah,
and it says Unidyne on the side of it.
Yeah.
And I was like, what is that?
Yeah, Unidyne was originally the Elvis mic that everyone called. That was the Unidyne 1.
Okay.
Unidyne 1, we shrunk that down to a smaller form factor. That's still in the portfolio today as the 55SH. Unidyne 3 is where SM58, SM57 comes from, and that's what we're using in this and all of those products. So yes, to some extent, they are all exactly the same. What's different? Some of the electronics inside them are different. The acoustic principles of the design of the product are different, therefore they have different sound qualities. But if you take a 58 and compare it to this, you get pretty close. And that still makes the 58 a awesome value for money product.
Sure.
Like, we haven't increased the price of it since we released it, so it's still sub $100 and you get an awesome sound. So
yeah. So difference in, for the person asking that question, difference in some features, but the main things might be pretty similar, but you start to get some choice.
Yeah.
So I would say don't stress. Don't stress too much about that. Do some shopping, do some research, ask some experts, reach out to Shure and others for some tech support, I would say. I think we've got time for a few more questions.
Okay.
We're still going to talk about choices of microphones for a second. This one I think is a great question because in some cases, I think the answer will be different here. Are lavaliers ever the right choice?
It's a really interesting question. 100% yes, they are.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we were having this discussion before we started filming. One of the considerations we have to make as audio engineers is making our talent comfortable. And sometimes, like, just clip a lav on. I mean, in this situation that we're in now, where we've got SM7Bs, I'm very conscious that I'm speaking into a microphone,
yes.
And that is affecting how I am answering questions. If we're wearing lavs, I can be like chilling.
Yeah.
Like, whatever.
Hanging back, yeah.
Fine, hanging back. It's going to cause the video guys a bit of a stress, I guess. But yeah, like that is going to make life easier. And I think from a presenting perspective as well, 100% lavaliers they're more discreet. They look better for the audience. So in that sense, yes, they do have a place. Are they more difficult to manage and engineer, especially if you're doing live reinforcement? Yeah, they are. So you're always kind of trying to find that compromise, that delta, I guess, between those two things. What do you think? You like a lav?
Well, I love that we were saying earlier that a lot of tech support is also person support.
Yeah.
We support the tech, but when we think about it, we're really supporting the people. So making sure that people are comfortable is very important. We capture performance. And if that performance is in any way going to be inhibited by this giant thing in front of me, this giant thing in front of me is now the wrong choice.
Yeah, I agree.
If it's not going to be, then it could very well be the right choice. But if we've got someone speaking and they're going to be moving around, they know that they need to move moving around, or they know that they're just going to tend to do so, this is not the right choice. Probably a good backup.
Yeah, maybe.
For when they actually do stand at a lectern or a podium or something. But if they're going to veer, I need to think about utility and whether they're going to be comfortable for sure.
One extra thing to that, like I said, I'm really conscious of the fact that I'm speaking to a microphone. That isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like I can feel my brain working in a more like, right, I have to be very, very focused and deliver my message type way, which I wouldn't have if I was having a lavalier microphone. Therefore, this might not be so effective for the type of podcast and interview we're trying to do, right? You want answers. You want them quick. You want them concise. You don't want to hear about what I have for dinner, right? Yeah.
I will say I'm going to borrow your accent there where you said lavalier. I say lavalier. And I am not European, and I'm sure that I've been saying it wrong all this time. So I'm going to take that back to the States and make sure everyone knows. Stop calling them lavaliers. It's lavalier.
I really hope it actually is, and we're not about to.
It is now. We're very trustworthy. We wear glasses. We wouldn't lie to you. Okay, there's a question that I want to ask you from a personal standpoint.
Okay.
Also, I got to say, I really love that history lesson that you gave on those microphones, and I would strongly encourage people, if you're interested in doing podcasting and microphones in general, just check that out. You're going to have the accidents that happen in our industry that turn into amazing things later are hilarious.
Yeah.
Basically, just mentioned the Fender Jaguar of microphones, and I'm going to look at it later. But so you know where my mind goes. There's a lot of things with music, but I want to ask you, from your perspective, in your opinion, what describes the perfect podcast sound to you?
It's a really good question. And my mind has changed on this quite a lot. I think if you asked me that question 4 years ago, I'd have been like, radio perfection. You know, warmth, quiet room, fidelity. I want to like put my ears in and be listening to BBC Radio 4, but on Spotify, right? I don't think that's the case anymore. I think what's really interesting about podcasting is it kind of democratizes the production. When you do that, you open yourself up to slightly lesser audio standards. And the question is, does that work like from a listener perspective, or is it unacceptable? I think the standard of production now of podcasting across the board is very high because the products have got very good. But I don't expect as a podcast listener completely perfect audio, especially if we're dialing somebody in. I kind of expect to hear the sound of the room or the dishwasher or whatever. Like all of that is, I was listening to a podcast last night where one of the participants was in a BA lounge and you can hear plates, right? And people around. And I was like, for some reason, this isn't unacceptable to me.
Yeah.
The story of this, how this has got there, you know, he's in the BA lounge, he's catching a flight, they're doing a podcast. As soon as that story's there, it's acceptable. So what's the best podcast sound? I think it's the sound that you got by having to put in the effort required to get there. right? I don't think a podcast sound is an overreached audio perfection. I think it's like, this is what we needed to do to get it good enough. This is a great podcast sound. SM7B is in Hall 8 at ISE with all the other stuff that's going on. Engineers making it sound great. I think that's an acceptable podcast sound. What about you? What do you think is the best podcast sound?
For me, it's very similar to what you just said. And I boil it down to that idea of signal to noise ratio. It's something that we talk about a lot. So what I consider noise is not always generic noise. It's not always static or the things that you always generally want to avoid. To me, noise could be the things that you're just not meaning to hear that are taking away from the clarity I have to understand that message, to understand that story someone is telling, or understand the story of the space or the room, like you said. We're recording at ISE. There's probably some background noise, and that's not bad. We probably want you to feel like there's energy going on in this room, that there's people milling about. You can't see them, but there's thousands upon thousands of people here. But if we were just in my studio at my house, I don't want you hearing my neighbors. So the perfect sound is the one that's capturing for me whatever that, like you said, the story, whatever's capturing the story and helping make that be clear. As long as that's the case, I think we're good.
One thing further to that, if you are producing it yourself, and I think this does affect the sound, you don't want to be just focusing on the tech. Right, if I've got to interview you, I want to be thinking about what questions I'm going to ask, how I'm going to promote it on social media, cutting stuff up, right? I don't want to be in the mix. I don't want to be thinking about how's my stuff going to work. It's got to be easy. Like podcasting has to be something that you can just plug and play and start going. That's very much our approach as Shure with that Motive portfolio. It's all about making it easy to connect, making stuff work really well, making a product that sounds really good that's going to look after you, right? SM7B's looked after us since 1973. It's not going anywhere. It's still a great option.
Yeah.
And people still choose it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to thank you so much, Jack, for joining us today, and definitely want to thank Shure for partnering again with us at the AVIXA TV booth. If people are looking for you and they want to find you and ask you any more questions, what would be the best place to find you?
So we're in Hall 3.
Okay.
I can't remember the exact stand number, but there's a big Shure logo. We're celebrating 100 years of Shure as well. Brand founded in 1925. We're looking at the history from then to 2025. So if you want more history, there's a whole history talk that we can go and do on that booth, which is really interesting. So yeah, come and say hello.
Awesome. What about social? Maybe find you or your company on LinkedIn or anything like that?
Absolutely. It's just Shure, SHURE on LinkedIn, and we're going to be posting all the time while we're here as well. So keep an eye on some stuff we got coming.
All right. Well, thanks again for joining us for Tech Support, and be sure to come back for even more as we ask more experts your burning questions about all things tech.